Are we finally doing it? I think we are. We're going to watch David's amazing film. That would be David Charles Plate. Synchromistic artist, thinker, also a very serious Kabbalist. And I would say, like the last sync artist we looked at, like Joe Alexander, a really big magician. And he made a film called Sorry Cassandra, I Misunderstood. Everything predicts 9/11. And in my view, this is really the official sequel to Back to the Future Predicts. We get a complete quote of Joe's entire film. Pretty much at the beginning. I mean, there's this first amazing introductory sequence, which I think is what we'll probably make it through today. I don't know. We'll see how much we want to look at today. But then we get Back to the Future Predicts in full, and then we get the rest of David's amazing film, which is 7 hours and 40 minutes long. So we're going to have to spend a lot of time to get through this one, but I love that. So because of that, I also don't feel the pressure here to make this particularly snappy and rapid. I would rather we kind of take our time and really try to understand this work of art. Because the truth is, I don't feel like I have a very good grasp on this work of art. This is a very dense and complex piece that is firing on many levels. I mean, just this, what David gives us here. Keep track of 4 video streams at once. This is an advanced piece of visual media that is asking you as the viewer to do very many sorts of perceptual operations at once. And so it's a good candidate to take a little slowly as well, in the literal sense of maybe slowing it down in our video settings. I'm kind of thinking if I want to give a little introduction to other aspects of David's work, I guess maybe I'll just mention some things and in the edit maybe sort of show some of them. He's also a tremendous collage artist. A big part of his practice is synchronizing films with an album. And so he calls that sync flicks, and there are just many, many, many such experiments. And, I've only seen a handful of them, but the ones that I've seen have all been just amazingly impressive. There's something about David's work that I appreciate and that I want to kind of put forward here at the beginning. There's a tremendous subtlety to what David does and a tremendous faith in the audience, a trust in the audience. And I probably have a little bit less faith in the audience in a way, because I always want to sort of explain things and make sure that people get stuff. I'm speaking now about my own work even. Like I try to construct my films in a way that, well, I do and I don't, because I also appreciate leaving things unsaid, which is, anyway, that's what I think David does so well, is he shows you things, but he doesn't really give you the punchline to the joke. He lets that form in your head as the experiencer. And that was a big lesson that I think I absorbed from David watching this film. And I would also like to say about this film going into it, because we might not reach some of these sections until much later, but there are areas of this film that I found so formally inspiring when I first viewed it. I mean, it really set into motion for me a whole different way of thinking about video. The idea that you could have multiple sort of video quotations on screen at once, and that there could be interesting relationships between those elements. I just was not thinking about video in that way before. To me, making a video was making a video, like shooting video and then editing it together in a linear way. David, as this kind of sync artist brain, like big eyeball sitting on top of like the sum total of like video media that has been made, or whatever, because we have access to the internet and BitTorrent and all these things now. David can quote anything he wants, and it's at this like higher level of like sort of media remix or manipulation. He's letting statements emerge out of these larger blocks, that he's forming and he's putting together. Anyway, just all of those elements together, I was so impressed by, and really just unlocked my thinking about video aesthetics. Another thing I'd like to say about this, similar to Joe's piece, there's a lot of really good formal invention in Back to the Future Predicts. And it's the same way here. I don't think you need to buy all of the stuff that you buy if you're a synchead in order to perceive that that what David's put together is a very interesting work of art and a very sophisticated one. Because David's aesthetic is in a way so humble. He just wants to show you these precious stones and have you appreciate them. But because of that humility, I just think very often profound aspects of his work go slightly unnoticed. And so anyway, because I like to just gab about art and about movies, I think part of my job maybe is to call attention to some of the areas of this work that where just amazing things are happening conceptually and formally, just in all these ways. So can you tell I'm really a fan of this one, and I'm really excited to jump into it. So let's jump into it without further ado. I'm sure I'll mention more sort of things about my personal relationship to it as we move through it, maybe sort of even right at the top here. I found this film at an interesting time in my life. Here, let's see here. Green marker. Last time, sorry, I am going to abort that personal anecdote for now. I don't want to focus too much on my narrative. We'll get to it eventually. Let's just lead here, though, with the piece. Last time, I gave the whole spiel about this, why we have to put these things on the top of our videos as sync artists. I'm not going to repeat all that here. I would just direct you back towards the analysis of Back to the Future Predicts 9/11, in which I go into all of this at some depth. Here, it's probably just enough to say it's hard to show our work for a number of reasons. People find it offensive for various reasons, or there are legal problems because it's a quotation-based art form typically. Or there are just various other sorts of objections and problems categorizing it and understanding it that make it difficult to exist. And so in order for us to get some of the things we make visible in the world in an accessible way, not just buried like on archive.org or other weird places some of us had to resort to, we have to put this kind of stuff and sometimes fight stuff and, do all this stuff to make our videos exist. So there's a little intro about that. And then David follows it up here with another piece of text, like Joe does. And let's just read it. David says, "Please understand that this request for permission to be granted for the fair use of this material for nonprofit research and educational purposes is in all seriousness nothing short of a prayer." And that's not a joke. That's, I think David's quite serious about that. And I would say that I just recognize that because that's how I relate to my work as a sync artist. The whole thing to me is a kind of prayer that I'm trying to share, a prayer to share. And so here's a prayer to allow the prayer to be shared. He says, "Myself and many others have dedicated our lives to this work, and it is my honest belief that all the creators, producers, writers, directors, actors, and musicians who made this film possible would approve of our intentions and what lengths we have gone to in order to present what we are presenting here for you today." And I really agree with this statement as well. I do think that, because these people who make these films and so on are creative people, if they could see, our intentions and the labor and all the things that we've done to try to reveal this deeper level of activity in the artwork, I think they really, most of them probably would appreciate it. And then he says, the community I belong to and myself extend infinite gratitude to whoever has the reason and heart to allow this work to be shared in what is without question the most challenging of times. And, I think I probably agree with that statement as well. I have my reasons. It's hard for me to know when it's playing and when it isn't, when I'm looking at, there we go, static text like this. So I'm going to resort to my manual controls for a second.
Your dad work here?
Okay. We are going to slow down David's film. Let's try it at 0.5. So, of course, we're in a quotation from The Breakfast Club here. Now, it's been a minute since I've watched this movie, both Cassandra and Breakfast Club. So, I'm not exactly sure what the original context is of all of this stuff in this movie. But maybe that will help us see other contexts in it. So let's watch it.
Carl?
Already I find it amusing that this guy's name's Carl. By way of reference perhaps to Carl Jung, the guy who invented the word synchronicity, from which we've inherited this phrase, sync. And so here's Carl. But here Carl is a janitor. And Carl is about to receive some degree of kind of like slight emotional abuse from these snotty teenagers, who are the protagonists of the film, of course.
What? Can I ask you a question? Sure. How does one become a janitor? You want to be a janitor? No, I just want to know how one becomes a janitor, because
I would like to note that we have a match emerging here in some capacity.
Andrew here is very...
I can't just say these things without something. By the way, that just means this is a little snapshot of an image that can be thought to correspond to the image of 9/11 in a high-dimensional, point-based way, i.e., there are many aspects of it that match. Let's see here. We do have a B element there with sunglasses. The red is doubled up there in that way. He's kind of next to this kind of a statue and so on. Elements like this and so on. Kind of a fractal placement of it here. It's another blue element up to a red element. Anyway, so blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. If you want to know more about that, check out the videos on my channel all about that. Particularly the video I made explaining my sync film, Radical Rewind. That's a good one to learn about the matches.
Interested in pursuing a career in the custodial arts. Oh, really? You guys think I'm just some untouchable peasant, sir? Peon, yeah? Maybe so. Following a broom around after shitheads like you.
I like that he mentions broom. I don't know.
For the last 8 years, I've learned a couple of things. I looked through your letters, looked through your lockers. I listened to your conversation.
I love
you
that.
don't know that, but I do. I am the eyes and ears of this institution.
This is really... David has such great taste. What a great area to quote. But so what we have here is basically, we have some people making fun of a person who's kind of on the outside of life in some way. He's the janitor. He hangs out in the background. Most people probably, like this kid, think he's just nothing much. I don't know. Something to that effect, right? But now he's saying, hey, guess what? Being on the outside of so in the metaphor that maybe is emerging here, right? This might be like culture. And here's someone who's a little bit outside of culture, that culture kind of looks down on. He's saying, well, from my position, I've been able to pay a lot of attention. I've been able to observe this thing from being a little bit on the outside. I see your whole lives, and I hear your conversations, and I know what you say and what you do and all this. And that has allowed me to learn something.
By the way, that clock's 20 minutes fast.
I really like, something about this guy suggests to me kind of the wise guru, you know? He's being playful with them. He's not actually offended by what that kid said, and he's not, you know, he's not actually trying to give them a hard time. He's just throwing it, you know, he's throwing the ball back a little bit. And then he says, by the way,
that clock's 20 minutes fast.
Great expression. But I also just like that we have at the end, very end of this, we have someone gesturing in the direction of a clock. A fast clock. There's something already about the notion of temporal synchronization or desynchronization. So, what a wonderful quotation to open with. And so I want to call attention just to that as well, that the act of placing a quote is a terribly significant action in the creation of a work of art. You know, it's not just some little clip that's here for an arbitrary reason. David's found just the clip that's going to introduce all these interesting aspects to us. The idea of looking at something from the outside, absorbing information in a subtle aggregative way over a long period of time is kind of what that janitor was describing. Sort of something about kind of the humility of, or a kind of a humble attitude, perhaps, that is necessary to perceive magical goings-on. You know, right? It's the janitor that sees all these subtle patterns and currents that might give him a real insight into what's going on in the lives of these kids and so on. Then it also works in these other ways. It points to the notion of clocks and temporal synchronization. Kind of literally points at them, which is also kind of funny because there's like a pun that then also is wrapped in a meta pun, and it's just wow. Like I find that this is just always the case with David's stuff. He can really pick a quote, and I don't know, but I would bet that a lot of that is just intuitive. It's probably part of the magic of it. At least that's how it works for me when I quote. I never know how beautifully these quotes are going to work. They just do manage to work in these profound high-dimensional ways often. So, wow. Just love the whole selection here. And one last thing about it, of course, is also is a quote that contains a couple high-dim image matches. So, quite fitting in a piece called Everything Predicts 9/11. Mr. Rabbit. Maybe like Down the Rabbit Hole. Now we're listening to a Leonard Cohen song. So I think a somewhat favorite artist of David's. And we see this, you know, we just heard dialogue about a clock, and now we flash to another clock. We just catch the transition from 11:29 to 11:30. Now I don't know why David has selected this particular clock. It is very nice that we receive an 88 here on the side that we might like to see it in a certain context. But it also is a clock that contains this number, 1113. This is a magical number to me. It is actually the value of my name in standard ordinal. Because then I believe the reverse ordinal is 211. Yeah, my name has some weird characteristics. And this is just a number that began to appear to me synchronistically before I knew that my name had coded it, actually. So it was just a powerful personal sync number for me. And so when I watched this film, in a moment when I really needed it, when my life was dissolving in a certain way, this was a sign to me. A kind of benign and hopeful sign. This quote had a powerful effect on me. chord that David played. Isn't that great?
Please the Lord. But
I would say that this chord pleased the Lord. I mean, it's just my opinion. But I bet it did. This is quite a thing, this film.
you don't really care.
So now we get this wonderful Blake quotation. And the beginning of this interesting piece of music. Is the name of this group Mogwai? I don't remember. Let's look it up here. Yeah. Scottish post. Yeah, this is the band, right? Hey, I got it right. I feel like I'll recognize the cover. Let's see. Yeah, it might have been Mr. Beast.
In music, you're basically having a conversation.
Hello, Hans
It's a
Zimmer.
question. It's an answer.
Question.
Ooh, a bit of a dodgy question here.
He's great. Okay, it is this. It's Auto Rock. Okay, we located the quote, finally. Sometimes that's what you've got to do with sync media if you really want to know what's going on. So, Auto Rock. So this is off of Mr. Beast, which was released in 2006 and recorded at Castle of Doom Studios. Ooh. And so, okay, we know what that is. And so we're hearing this song, Auto Rock, from the band Mogwai. I'm going to quit Chrome so it's not eating resources in the background. And then we get this Blake quote, and then we're about to see one of David's film pairings set to this Mogwai track. And so this quote is from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And what to say about about Bill Blake? This is great, and I'm glad to see that David shares my desire to refer to these people on a first-name basis for some reason. Bill was a guy who learned how to see very many subtle things that most people don't know how to see. And he talked about that in the context of something he referred to as the fourfold vision. I don't remember exactly what all the four things are, but one of them is like symbolic sight, definitely. And so, I think that Bill was a synchead, basically. He saw into the other side in many ways. Directly with fantasy visions, I think. And also in synchronistic ways by interpreting his environment symbolically. And so those are the things he's getting at with the different kinds of vision. But this is from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which I would describe as a pretty alchemical text. I mean, just in the title there, we have a union of opposites theme. And let's read it. The ancient tradition that the world will be consumed in fire at the end of 6,000 years is true, as I have heard from hell. For the cherub with his flaming sword is hereby commanded to leave his guard at the tree of life, and when he does, the whole creation will be consumed and appear infinite and holy, whereas it now appears finite and corrupt. This is my favorite part. This will come to pass by an improvement of sensual enjoyment. But first, the notion that man has a body distinct from his soul is to be expunged. This I shall do by printing in the infernal method, by corrosives, which in hell are salutary and medicinal, melting apparent surfaces away and displaying the infinite which was hid. David has bolded and highlighted this. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. David's, we're fading in material from Poltergeist now in the background. I mean, we could spend a long time, I'm sure, trying to understand William Blake and The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. How much to attempt here? Well, let's focus perhaps on the area that David's focused on, or that he's very probably generously, bolded for his audience. He's just telling you that this film is going to reveal to you, maybe, a pathway through the images you see in the film, but also maybe just in your life, just the visual information that passes through your brain, that there's a way in which that information is implying eternity. And so if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. This is the same poet, that wrote about infinity in a grain of sand. This is a big notion for Blake. And a big notion for all of us, probably. This will come to pass by an improvement of sensual enjoyment. Road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. That kind of idea, right? Sensual. That doesn't necessarily imply sexual, but sort of implies sexual, right? But I would think maybe even just in the context of enjoyment of images. And yeah, we do need a big improvement there. Most people are still far too embarrassed and self-censoring in the images they will allow themselves to enjoy. I would say that's a major growth area that humanity ought to focus on for a little while. And maybe we are focusing on. Just not focusing on with quite enough consciousness yet or something. We're falling deeper and deeper into these fantasy images, but somehow both the understanding and the enjoyment are a little impeded currently. Anyway, first the notion, Blake is so funny. He just lays out this incredible statement that's like so much to unpack. He's like, but first, the notion that man has a body distinct from his soul is to be expunged. It's a very interesting notion there too. Because the split of mind from body or like body and soul is very fundamental to the kind of Christianity we had in earlier iterations of the West and still have in the West. This is so fascinating. This quote. This I shall do. So I will cure this illusion, by printing, by copying pictures. So you see it is very very valid to read sensual enjoyment as being about the enjoyment of images, because Blake takes it there right away. By printing in the infernal method, hellish printing, by corrosives, which in hell are salutary and medicinal. I'm trying to tell you, look, I'm not talking about something that's ultimately going to hurt you in that kind of way. This is a salve, melting apparent surfaces away and displaying the infinite which was hid. Okay. Amazing quote, and we're now going to move into this amazing piece. Now, this is the material that opens Poltergeist from the very beginning of Poltergeist. Maybe not the very, very beginning, but it's close to the beginning of the film. And we're just watching the television set, and it's about to turn off. It's like the last broadcast. So we're watching kind of like the end of broadcast thing. It's like, it kind of implies to me something about the end of an era, though. I've always associated this opening in Poltergeist, just in my read of Poltergeist, with kind of the end of the West. We're in the late stages of whatever the civilization is now. And it's like information static now. And as we see that, like, David breaks the lettering up into all these little pieces. So, I don't know, it implies to me that at the end of... So I'm just kind of running with my art intuition now, that at the end of Western civilization, we are going to have some kind of an encounter with noise in the display. Maybe that's what some of us are going through right now in these weird marginalized communities on the internet. And maybe our culture just really doesn't understand what's happening there yet. That this is going to eventually activate the transcendent function and turn very many people into interesting new kinds of Christs. Maybe all at once or something, at some point in the near future. Okay. I don't know where that does or doesn't sit. Those are my ideas about it, though. But now we see, or it's possible to see already, that we're not purely looking at a quotation of Poltergeist. So there's been an escalation, but a very designed escalation. It almost feels like you're playing tutorial levels in a video game at the moment. First, David showed you just a straight quotation from The Breakfast Club. And he was asking you to notice subtle things in that quote. In a way, also, you're not going to see any of those subtle things about what that quote might be implying about sync and information and so on, until you've watched David's piece through once. So by the time you get to the end of David's piece, then you could wrap back around in a loop-like way and see this quotation now in a new way. And so that's similar to what Joe did, when he already shows you the main tableau there in the background, and then you get to loop back around later, and then he brings it all into color, and now you have a new understanding of the visual material there. It's just like that with the Breakfast Club quote. At first, you're not going to know why Dave is quoting it. But after you've understood a little more what his piece is about, maybe, then it starts to light up in a new way. And maybe that happens in an iterative way. Maybe every time you watch David's piece, you're going to get a little bit of a richer context for that quote. But so that was just the first step. Now David's going to say, here, I'm going to overlay 2 quotes. There's literally a dimensional increase here. Now we're dealing with a space where there can be connections not just between material on one plane. So it would be like, let's say this is the Breakfast Club quote. You can find things that relate to other things visually, just in that quotation, like in a sort of sync image cluster-based analysis kind of thing, like, oh, here are these weird things in the background, here are these weird things in the foreground, let's connect some of these points and make them meaningful and semiotic and see what we might, and maybe apply a high-dimensional coincidence filter or something and see what we can learn about it. Or it might be points on that one quotation plane that relate to exterior things, like if you know some things about sync and about sync art and what that means, like maybe you can read some of that back into the quote and so on. But so now there's all of that twice, because there's 2 quotes now. So we get all of those possibilities again in the other quotation layer, but now there's also the possibility for point correspondence between the 2 layers of quote, because we're literally going to receive an aggregative image now. Wow. Sorry, but people ought to appreciate this work of art a little more. This is a really amazing thing. And in general, David's practice is quite amazing. It yields amazing alignments, of the sort we're about to witness here. This dog. So funny. So here's a slightly better grab of see what's going on. We can already detect that we're overlaying quotes, because here we have this tree line fading in. This is the tree line from E.T. So we're actually looking at Poltergeist and E.T. at once. And this is not... there are actually, I think at the end, there's a slight little editing for rhythm. But in general, this has not been edited to work. And it also has not been kind of arbitrarily lined up in some way. Like, it turns out that E.T. and Poltergeist are almost exactly the same length. And so this is just the 2 films as they naturally fall on top of each other. That's a pretty interesting aspect of this particular sync. I don't know if it's always that way with David's syncs. I think sometimes he will jiggle it around a little bit. But I would imagine generally he doesn't have to do it that much. What I found is you really don't have to do it that much. When I was aligning Interstate 60 and Back to the Future, it was really just the way they fell naturally almost worked perfectly, and then it just required like a slight pushing of one, just a little bit forward or backwards or something. Just a little jiggle, and then it locks in. It's like, it's like this. It's like a key fitting into a lock, It's like suddenly all these points correspond all at once, high dimensionally. Yeah, amazing. And amazing how this one works. Because E.T. and Poltergeist, of course, were also... There's the ship from E.T. coming in, which is briefly overlaid on the television set here. Also, the dog running around, and this is kind of like stars and cosmos ideas. it is like a serious the dog star like notion appearing. Also with the television set here and these little robot guys, I do feel that we have momentary match flickering in there. What was I saying? They were filmed at the same time, and so they're actually, if you watch we're not going to watch the entire E.T. Poltergeist thing in Cassandra. David is just quoting a portion of his own work here, but actually not. Maybe this one isn't even publicly released in full. There might have been a legal issue with it or something, but I'm not sure. In any case, I have seen the full sync. In other words, the Poltergeist and E.T. just running in their entirety, aligned in this way. And wow, David selected a beautiful moment here, but there are many such beautiful moments in the full piece. So shouts out to that if anyone wants to check it out, or even line it up yourselves and check it out. We all have access to nonlinear video editors these days, right? Just a technical thing. I wonder if David's using a fancy transparency mode here, or if this is a 50-50 opacity blend kind of thing. I often will use interesting kind of Adobe blend modes. This looks to me like it might be a blend. I'm not sure. This almost comes together to imply a third eye. Except the moon there, maybe. Not quite sure what the ET material is there flickering through. It's more the spaceship, obviously. Okay. This is such a funny thing in this movie, potato chips. I find this all so enigmatic. I do somehow feel that there's great meaning in this that we're just not quite getting. Visual meaning. Dog eating chips off the floor overlaid with this strange thing. So many interesting details in Poltergeist. This weird stuff. And there's Carol Ann, of course. I can't get into all the Carol Ann sync. It's tragic and terrible, but also very potent. You can research it if they'd like to. I find this interesting. This is made out of branches. And then here we have all these tree branches. And if you know Poltergeist, this is also just beautiful things are happening here. If you know Poltergeist, you know that there's a big kind of scary action sequence that takes place with a tree as well. David, as a Kabbalist, is very interested in the Tree of Life, of course. And so I wonder if he relates this tree stuff back to that at all. Definitely we get a kind of a Moonchild idea here. Look at this. It's like she's being touched by the alien through the moon, through the unconscious, see? Which also then, because of this kind of branch motif, it already also links the unconscious into the idea of nature. There's just a lot of great stuff going on. This is just such an amazing formal thing. It's as if E.T. parts these branches for Carol Ann to step through. She moves through just... I wonder how that happened there. I guess it's because of the value levels. The branches here move into shadow, and so the way that this blending mode or the opacity blend works is it gives us the impression that she's moved now in front of those branches. I doubt that that's something David has worked at all. I bet that just emerges quite naturally out of how those video layers aggregate. And so we're kind of like inside E.T.'s ship here, I believe. And so these are these like weird mushroom plants and things. It's very cool how they blend into the environment. It implies a descent into nature, into perhaps an explicitly kind of psychedelic nature. Oh, just such an image. I don't know, I just love it. It is really giving us an idea of kind of like alien pod plants like behind the video display. I just relate to this so much. It's really, Sync is this kind of vibe to me often. I feel like it's the weird octopus behind the screen, as it were. To borrow Alan Waller's metaphor from Always Record 197. See, I'm getting better about plugging material. A little bit necessary, I guess. Carol Ann sits down in front of the display, and we get another kind of enlightenment thing that then immediately pulls a reverse shot into one of the most impressive alignments in the piece, in my opinion. The Poltergeist E.T. Sync piece. And not the most impressive alignment in Cassandra. There are so many I couldn't possibly pick. I mean, look at this. She just becomes, I mean, it perfectly forms a crown, and like a crown of thorns, for God's sakes. And this perfectly aligns with her eye. It's like the moon eye, like that half. It is a kind of hemispheric balance, Christ consciousness image emerges there. And again, David hasn't constructed this. This is just what happens when you put these two movies on top of each other. Again, more or less without any fiddling. They're just exactly the same length, and if you put them, start them at the same time, this is what you'll get. God, I love it. I just love that one so much. It's so beautiful. Again, her head is perfectly in the moon. It just keeps linking Carol and the moon. And to the display, therefore. Here's going to be another kind of E.T. manipulating a plant that is then attached to the people, or like, kind of like almost like tickling the people. Here, Carol Ann gets rabbit ears, and so becomes a bit like Alice, maybe. It's just like E.T. is fondling parents, fondling the kids. This is really some kind of Donnie Darko idea, I think. I don't know, just this kid in his bedroom with the rabbit ears, where a disaster with a tree takes place. I'll have to blank out her name probably, but that actually syncs really, really hilariously, so I think I'm going to have to leave that in. That was in reference, I had told somebody that I had mentioned something about aliens, and that was the response to it. So that was very conspicuously timed. Yes, we're not pretending to be aliens here on Sync Century. We really are all aliens. That's my view of the human condition, basically. We are the aliens. We just don't know it yet. Well, so now the dad has woken up. I find that kind of interesting, too. It was the child that saw it first, but now the rest of the family is going to join in this weird alien perception. And remember, David's given us the context that we need to read this in that way. That this is meant to be a statement about perception, because we led into it with the William Blake quote about seeing infinity in images by printing in the infernal method. I love this Mogwai piece, by the way. And this is simply such a great direct metaphor for what we do as synkheads. Staring into the noise with a childlike gaze. Be a little playful with what you're seeing in the box, or you're gonna miss things. Look at her smile. So great. And what a great film, too. I mean, I know it's technically Toby, but it's a Spielberg movie, and one of his best, I would say. What a thing. We just get... It implies... I love it so much, sorry. Inside of her head, now, we see a cityscape extending into the horizon, with foliage in the front. So it's the invisible city. This is the unconscious. It's such a great metaphor for the unconscious. It's almost an Atlantis idea. It looks like the submerged city underwater, but it's like it's the city that is the natural city, nature's city on the interior, something like that. And then Carol Ann places her hands on the display. I also used just this section of Poltergeist in Interstate. But I think it has more impact here in David's piece. And I think this is the one section where I think he cut it slightly so that her hands land on the screen just as we get that nice tom hit in the Mogwai piece. I think that was absolutely the correct decision. It gives it so much beautiful weight here. Yeah. Yes. And then we cut into another image of a clock. So that's the second one, right? The first one we saw, I think it'll be useful to do this. The first one we saw had 11:30. And let's just note it begins on 11:29. And then the next clock we get is... Actually, there's a lot of information in this one. We have 17 and Friday. And then we have 7:22. Copal could mean something. And it's, of course, we probably know it's about to flip into 7:23. So this one, we can be quite certain David has selected by way of reference to the Kubrick idea, Room 237, which I have argued elsewhere is a visual match to the word sex, a kind of subliminal outline substitution. The 2 implies the curvature of the S, the 3 is like a backwards E, and it's the diagonal action of the 7 that I think implies the X. There aren't really, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's really the only number with a strong diagonal aspect like that. 4 would be the thing that would come closest, but a 4 is just far too triangular overall. That's always going to imply an A more than anything else, probably, if we were going to do a kind of image number. So I'm going to pause here. I find this very interesting, in fact, because the way that gematria works, right, is that and David is going to use a lot of gematria in this film, so it is relevant that we introduce it now. The way that gematria works, right, is you say, okay, A equals 1, B equals 2. It's a simple substitution cipher. C equals 3, and so on all the way down. And so then you can convert words into numbers and numbers into words. But what I think Kubrick was doing with 237 was a kind of substitution cipher, but one that proceeds on the basis of visual image matching. Because E does not equal 3 in the basic ordinal gematria system, E equals 5, right? Because D is 4. So, but in Stanley's substitution, E equals 3 because the shapes are similar. They're just mirrors of each other, and then one's a little wiggly and the other's straight. But it's basically the same shape. And remember, of course, also that in the context of cubrology, The Shining is a film that tells you it's valid to read letters backwards and forwards because we get all that stuff with red rum in the mirror and all of that. So anyway, it's a kind of gematria in a way, but a different kind of gematria, and one that I just perceive a lot in my natural sync life. I'm often reading numbers as letters, but not so often with a gematria substitution cipher, more often just in terms of the straight-up visual correspondence. This kind of manages to include some information about that, maybe. And also, it's just such a great, cool thing to do, and like I said, David leaves it in the background, at least for now. So he's always so tasteful and like understated about what he's doing, and that's something I really, really appreciate. So now we're back into Back to the Future Predicts. I don't think we need to rewatch Back to the Future Predicts since we have already analyzed it in some length. So I'm going to skip through it.
You're Dr. Brown.
It is interesting that David appends the part 2 here.
Cautions are necessary.
Called the Twin Pines Mall. Group
We'll watch it in hyper-condensed skip granularity like this. That'll get us into the vibe of it. Okay.
Sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
So now we have a special thanks to all the different sync heads and people that David has worked with. Set to the theme music to Stranger Things. Another great selection.
If you need assistance, please call the operator.
Joe Alexander. Rabbi Baruch Goldberg. I think this is David's rabbi, with whom he's done many interesting translations of passages from the Zohar, some of which seem to include precognitive material to do with, you guessed it, 9/11. I think he maybe recently published those translations as well. I'm not sure. I know he's working on that in any case. If he hasn't published them already. I'm pretty sure he did, though. Anyway, so many names here. We'll just leave it at the entire Synchromystic community. For helping to reveal the bittersweet truth. There ain't nothing in room 237. Another Stanley quote here, of course. We're listening to Halloran. We see part 2 and then we see part 1. So there's the notion of backwards temporal travel already, and David has presented us that temporal backwardsness already in the context of a red and a blue pair. Because wasn't the part 2 in a red, and now we've got the blue.
So stay out. You understand? Stay out.
They asked it to me to make a picture of
Okay, and now we're talking to Jodorowsky.
1 hour and a half for the theaters.
Who's a director who made insane films like The Holy Mountain, which might be annoying for me to track down footage of it, but whatever, we need to quote it. Put it right there.
I said, no, why the time? I will make a picture of 12 hours or 20 hours.
Exactly. Wait, let's make sure we appreciate precisely what was said there. I was too busy gabbing about who he was.
Stay out.
They asked it to me to make a picture of 1 hour and a half for the theaters. And I said, no, why the time? I will make a picture of 12 hours.
Or experience have
So they wanted to make an hour and a half, and he's saying, look, I can't communicate to you what I want to communicate to you in an hour and a half. There's just no way. So partly what this is here to do is to explain to the viewer why David's film has to be 7.5 hours long. You might say, that's insane. I'm not going to sit through 7.5 hours, especially when you're not even telling me what it's about. It's going to be some weird 9/11 thing. You're just showing me like random clips of random movies with no context for 7 hours. Like, well, maybe there's something so profound that it's just going to take 7 hours to express it. It's basically, I would say, what the function
Or
is.
20 hours.
Or 20 hours even. And now this I'm not actually sure what David's quoting here. Visually, like what the... Like, is this a shot from a film, maybe? But let's read the quote. Looks like it's been removed anyway. I tried to watch it yesterday, but it was just clips of... Exactly, just clips of old movies with no point. The Mirror. I wonder if that is something that The Mirror said about David's work somehow. Or maybe it's just some other context he's grabbed from. But it does work with the image next. It's kind of like David's offering you a flower, but maybe you're going to just be like creeped out by that flower or something and not understand that it really is a beautiful flower. It's going to take you 7.5 hours to be able to smell it and realize what a beautiful odor it has. For ABBA. Now, so I think that ABBA is a particular sync fixation for David. I find that very interesting because I have sort of similar musical groups that I'm very fixated on. And I would say I just find ABBA interesting. I like ABBA's music, and I find ABBA interesting as a topic, and I can see why David feels a numinosity on them. I do think they're a strange, numinous pop cultural object in some way. And it begins just with the strange, symmetry of their logo. It's like they're resonating the idea of hemispheric convergence just in the visual, presentation of their band name. But it's another thing that... And I think they do spell it that way, right? They actually use strict visual symmetry in the logo, I think. Might be wrong about that, but I think that's true. It's just another thing, too, that's kind of okay, that's a word. But if you think about that word as if it were a graphic, think about it more like a picture. Think about it with your right hemisphere. Think about it as picture brain. Sorry, I drew that on the left because that's going to go into your... whatever. It's going to go into whatever side I should gesture in the direction of to imply the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is going to view it as a picture. And it is going to view that picture as a picture that has as a primary property lateralized symmetry, like that. And it's going to say, oh, I know what that is. That's a picture of me. That's a picture of the divine pair. It's a picture of the brain, or of the fundamental binary nature of reality, even, or something. So it's just going to recognize that as a very archetypal, primal thing. And so you see, just ABBA's name carries a certain numinosity, I would say.
Now, if
And so now we get to see one of David's amazing collage pieces. I'm sorry, I'm just going to point in the direction of things that instantly catch my eye, like the lament configuration paired with a religious figure over here. And, he's placed the lament immediately above his pillars. There's the one, there's the other. That's quite significant, because as we know, the lament configuration has now been placed at ground zero, which is where the twins used to sit. So David's collage, I wonder when he made this collage. It would seem to be predictive of that a little bit already. I do have to say, in the context of 9/11 image matching, David has placed this little graphic right about at the location we would want to see the North Tower wound. And he's placed a red-headed actor, or someone, I'm not sure who this is actually. So we have red hair there as well. So this is a match, in fact. David has constructed a a match. I wonder if that was deliberate or not. And then he's mirrored that match over here to preserve the global symmetry of his image. And also he's drawing out the symmetry of the ABBA logo, which he just showed you, for ABBA, and then he shows you this big symmetrical image. So, boy, there's just so much going on here.
You're playing
Right away. I wish we could just sit here and now spend an hour looking at all the interesting relationships that can be drawn just in David's image here. But we have 7.5 hours to get through, so we're not going to do that. But we are going to listen to a quote now from David Lynch, I believe. And he is going to talk about his unhappiness that people view things on their phones, I think. It's about this.
the movie on a telephone. You will never in a trillion years experience the film. You'll think you have experienced it.
Gosh, and now we're in another statement of the pillars, and he's done it again, I'm afraid. Oh, he really has. There's our red element, there's our blue element. That's quite correctly handed. He's paired them with candles and smoke. It's on a clock tower this time. I would say Crowley doubles up the Mr. N energy. How spectacular. And also, how similar is this, isn't it, to all this stuff like Dangerous era, Michael Jackson artwork, and Leave Me Alone music video, and so on, where we also saw these kinds of matches emerge.
But you'll be cheated. It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone.
I love this Lynch quote. I kind of almost don't agree with it in a way. I think the word double over here. I mean, that's pure fantasy. Where David has chosen to break the symmetry, I think, is probably very significant. Here we have another pair of redheads. So there is actually a red twins statement here. Here we have an inversion now. We have the red over here and the blue over here. Still a match, though. Anyway, I'm not sure if I agree with the Lynch quote fully. I think you can experience a film on your phone. You experience it in a different way. One of the things you gain on your phone is the ability to scrub and screen capture and mark up. Those are all things that are available on these phones now. I can just take a screenshot and then I can draw on top of that screenshot. I can't do, I can pause and consider. I can't do that when I watch a film in the cinema. So, what I would say to David Lynch, if he's ever watching this, which he never will, of course, but if somehow he were to watch it, what I would say to David Lynch is I would say, look, there are just trade-offs, okay? Watching a film in the big cinema church complex is a great way to watch a film because it allows a certain, immersive spiritual connection to emerge with the film that's very hard to get through a phone. And of course, I see and agree with that completely. But I would also say that you gain things on the phone that let you appreciate the film in a deeper way. For instance, by being able to move through it non-linearly, jump around in it, pause it, draw on top of it, and so on. It's still too hard to do all that stuff on these phones and also on our computers and so on. I have to sort of put together this special weird system to do it on my laptop and etc. But that stuff is going to become more prevalent, I think, as time goes on, I hope. And anyway, it's just already the case that, yeah, it's just a different experience viewing it on the phone. I think it is changing the way we consume visual media, but I don't think it's changing it in a purely bad way. It is changing it in a bad way from the standpoint of sort of participation mystique with the audience in the event kind of thing. That's still, going to a movie theater is still a very magical, special thing, I think. But anyway, I love the Lynch quote and I love David Lynch's energy, but I often take slight exception to the things he says specifically.
Get real.
And then at the top, David's placed another red twins pair. Babylon. What a great collage. Okay, and now we're transitioning into another quote. So you're starting to get a sense for the pace and the frequency, kind of David's intellectual metabolism. We're going to cut through a lot of different stuff. It's not going to be like Back to the Future Predicts, where we are looking at one movie in extreme depth and kind of exploding out all its aspects. Here we're gonna it's more like channel flipping. We're gonna, at least through certain portions of this film, we're gonna be looking at a lot of different quotations very rapidly and also combining very many different quotations into one big visual thing often. I think I'm going to take a break here at least, and possibly even break for the day. Maybe I'll upload this on its own. Maybe I'll wait and combine it with some more filming or something. I'm not sure. But I think this might be a good place to end it, actually. We got 20 minutes in. That's really not bad, considering the depth of stuff that we need to look at. But in any case, yeah, this was a fantastic thing for me. I really love this film, and it's great to connect with it a little bit again. Okay, I guess that's it for now. I hope everyone will tune in for the next chapter of Analyzing Cassandra. And I'll see you in the future. Bye.